The crisp autumn air of October 1990 hung heavy over Boise, Idaho, carrying the scent of drying leaves and distant pine, a fragrance both invigorating and melancholic. For 16-year-old Alex Miller, it was the best time of year. Days were bright, filled with the last vestiges of Indian summer warmth, but the evenings offered a chill that made a worn flannel shirt feel like a second skin, a comfort Alex embraced. He was a creature of habit, a reliable and quietly dependable presence in the Miller household, a stabilizing force even amidst the typical teenage turbulence. His routine was a comforting rhythm that marked the passing of the weekdays. School at Boise High, with its red brick facade and the echo of generations of students. Then a few hours stocking shelves, tidying displays, and patiently helping customers at True Value Hardware on State Street, a local institution where he earned his spending money and a sense of quiet responsibility. Afterwards it was homework, often spread across his cluttered desk, and if he was lucky, an hour or two with his friends, typically at the Capitol Mall, a bustling hub for teenagers, or just cruising the main drags in whatever beat-up car one of them could convince an older sibling to lend. Alex wasn't a rebel, not by any stretch of the imagination. He was just Alex, quiet, observant, with a quick, dry wit that usually caught people off guard and always elicited a genuine smile. He possessed a profound love for the foothills that cradled Boise, their jagged profiles a constant backdrop to city life. He would often disappear for hours on his trusty mountain bike, exploring winding trails unknown to even seasoned local hikers, his solitary adventures a stark contrast to his otherwise grounded existence. His parents, Sarah and Jim Miller, knew he was a good kid. A little introverted, perhaps, preferring the silent companionship of nature to the clamor of large social gatherings, but undeniably grounded, with a strong moral compass. Friday, October 26th, started like any other. Alex woke to the comforting, familiar smell of Sarah's coffee brewing and the faint, low murmur of the local news radio seeping from the kitchen. He grabbed a quick breakfast, a bowl of Cheerios swimming in milk, and exchanged a few words with Jim, who was already dressed in his work clothes for his shift at the Micron plant. "Don't be too late tonight, Al," Jim said, ruffling Alex's sandy blonde hair as he headed out the door, the morning sun still weak but promising. "Got a long shift, Dad." "Probably catch up with Mark and Kevin after," Alex replied, already halfway out the kitchen door, his backpack slung over one shoulder. School was uneventful, following its predictable pattern. He managed to ace a pop quiz in history, a subject he found surprisingly engaging, and sketched intricate, almost architectural designs in the margins of his math notebook, dreaming of a future he hadn't quite defined yet but felt was waiting for him. After the final bell, a jarring clang that always signified freedom, he hopped on his ancient, but remarkably sturdy, mountain bike and pedaled the familiar route to the hardware store. Mr. Henderson, the owner, a man whose exterior gruffness barely concealed a deep affection for his young employees, greeted him with a customary but affectionate nod. "Miller, glad you're here. We got a new shipment of galvanized nails that needs sorting, and Mrs. Peterson needs her garden hose fixed by sundown. She's particular about her petunias." The hours passed in the familiar cadence of customer queries, the satisfying clatter of tools being put away, and the metallic, slightly dusty smell of the store. Around 7 p.m., as dusk settled over Boise, painting the western sky in hues of fiery orange and deep, brooding purple, Alex punched out. He called Sarah from the payphone situated outside the store, its metal casing cold against his ear, letting her know he was heading to Mark's house just a few blocks away, near the edge of the Hyde Park neighborhood. "I'll be home by 10, Mom, promise." That was Alex. He always kept his promises, a trait his parents implicitly trusted. He met Mark and Kevin at Mark's garage, a ramshackle, oil-stained haven where they frequently tinkered with an old Honda Civic, trying to coax its reluctant engine back to life. They shared a bag of chips, talked about the usual teenage fair school gossip, the elusive nature of girls, and the upcoming football game under the Friday night lights. Around 9:30 p.m., Alex decided it was time to head home. "See you guys tomorrow," he called out, hoisting his dark green canvas backpack, worn but reliable, onto his shoulders. "Later, Al." "Don't get into any trouble," Kevin yelled back, a playful jab that Alex simply grinned at, gave a wave, and pedaled off into the deepening, star-pricked night. The route home was etched into his memory, a well-worn path through the quiet, tree-lined residential streets of Boise's North End. Streetlights glowing like amber pearls cast long, dancing shadows ahead of him. The air grew noticeably colder, carrying a sharper bite, and he pulled his denim jacket tighter around himself. but Alex never arrived home. The 10 o'clock deadline came and went. Then 10:15, Sarah Miller's initial, fleeting concern morphed into a cold, hard knot of fear in her stomach. Alex was never late, never. She called Mark's house, her voice tight with a tension she tried desperately to mask. Mark, sleepy and confused, confirmed Alex had left at 9:30. She called Kevin. Kevin confirmed. The panic, a visceral, sickening dread, began to tighten its grip. She called Jim, who was still at Micron, her voice trembling uncontrollably, the words barely forming. "He's not here, Jim. Alex isn't home." Jim, usually stoic and practical, felt a sudden, icy jolt of alarm pierce through his composure. "He's probably just with a friend, Sarah. Maybe lost track of time. You know how kids are." But even as he spoke the comforting words, he knew, deep in his gut, that something was profoundly, terribly wrong. By midnight, after frantic calls to every friend and acquaintance Alex had, their voices growing hoarse with desperation, Jim and Sarah were at the Boise Police Department, their faces etched with a fear that was both raw and utterly heartbreaking. Detective Sergeant David Olson of the Boise PD was on duty that night. A man with a weary face that bespoke years of encountering human suffering and a reputation for quiet, unyielding persistence, he listened patiently as the Millers, their voices hoarse with strain, delivered their statement. He noted the boy's description with meticulous care. 5'9", sandy blonde hair that tended to fall across his forehead, clear blue eyes, last seen wearing a faded denim jacket, a t-shirt emblazoned with a local band's logo, comfortable jeans, and his worn New Balance sneakers. Alex's backpack, a utilitarian dark green canvas model, was also missing, a detail Olson logged carefully. Olson started with the standard protocol, a checklist ingrained in decades of police work. Checking local hospitals for accidents, juvenile detention centers, bus stations, and the Greyhound terminal for any potential runaways. Nothing. The initial assumption, as it often was with missing teenagers, reluctantly leaned towards a runaway scenario. "Kids sometimes just need to blow off steam, Mr. and Mrs. Miller. He'll probably show up by morning, sheepish and hungry," Olson offered, his voice attempting to convey reassurance. But his gut, honed by years on the force, told him otherwise. Alex Miller, from his parents' tearful descriptions, simply didn't fit the profile of a flight risk. His parents insisted on it with a palpable, almost desperate conviction. The first few days following Alex's disappearance were a disorienting blur of frantic activity and agonizing hope for the Miller family. Time seemed to warp, each passing hour feeling like both an eternity and a fleeting moment. Flyers with Alex's smiling, earnest face blanketed the city of Boise, stapled to every lamppost, taped to storefront windows, handed out ceaselessly at grocery stores and community centers. The photo, a candid shot of Alex laughing, captured a glimmer of the boy they knew, a stark contrast to the grim reality of his absence. Volunteers, mostly friends and sympathetic neighbors, organized tireless search parties, their determined faces reflecting a collective refusal to give up. They focused their efforts on the areas Alex was known to frequent: the popular Camel's Back Park, its trails winding steeply into the Boise foothills, and the riverbanks along the winding Boise River, where Alex sometimes fished. The Boise Police Department, responding to the growing urgency, escalated the search, deploying 9 units to scour the natural landscapes. But the trails were dry, the ground hard and unyielding, offering few scents for the dogs to follow. The crisp autumn weather, which Alex so loved, quickly turned colder, bringing with it a biting wind and the increasingly ominous threat of early snow flurries, further complicating and hindering the search efforts. The encroaching winter seemed to conspire with the unknown. News reports picked up the story with increasing frequency. Local TV stations, KTVB and KBOI, ran continuous segments featuring Sarah and Jim, their faces gaunt with sleeplessness, their voices cracking with raw, unvarnished plays for any scrap of information. "Please," Sarah begged into the microphone during one tearful interview, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "If anyone has seen our Alex, if you know anything at all, no matter how insignificant it seems, just call. We just want him home. We just want to know he's safe." The community rallied at first with a heartwarming display of solidarity. Meals were brought to the Miller's door, a steady stream of casseroles and comfort food. Phone calls offered heartfelt support, occasional tips that inevitably led nowhere, and sometimes, tragically, baseless speculation that only deepened their anguish. But as days turned into weeks and weeks bled into a relentless month, the stream of tips dwindled to a trickle, the intense public interest began to wane, and the initial wave of hope, so fragile to begin with, slowly, agonizingly began to recede, replaced by a gnawing, ever-present despair. The case transitioned from an active search to a missing persons cold case, its physical file growing thicker with dead ends, unanswered questions, and a chilling absence of resolution. Detective Olson, despite the official classification, never truly let go. He kept Alex's photo on his desk, a constant, silent reminder amidst the ever-shifting stacks of active files. Every few months he'd pull the thick, yellowing file, rereading witness statements, poring over the few crime scene photos, though there was no actual crime scene, just an unfathomable absence, hoping a new perspective, a forgotten detail, a pattern previously missed, would finally surface. He interviewed Alex's friends again and again, their youthful memories fading with each passing year. He looked into possible acquaintances, checked every local rumor, no matter how outlandish, but Alex Miller had simply, inexplicably, vanished. There were no ransom demands, no cryptic notes, no reported suspicious activity prior to his disappearance, no known enemies, no history of drug use or mental health issues. Just gone. The institutional limitations of 1990 were stark and unforgiving. There were no pervasive CCTV cameras blanketing the city, no cell phone pings to trace a final location, no digital footprints to track. The city of Boise, for all its growing size and bustling urbanity, still felt intimately connected to the vast, wild, untamed landscape surrounding it, a landscape that Olson knew from grim experience could swallow a person whole without a trace, holding its secrets with an impenetrable silence. For Sarah and Jim, life became an unbearable limbo, a purgatorial existence defined by an agonizing absence. Every knock on the door, every ringing phone, brought a surge of adrenaline so intense it felt like a physical blow, only to be followed by crushing, soul-deep disappointment. Their marriage, once a fortress of shared love and understanding, buckled under the immense, crushing strain of their unspoken grief and the relentless what-ifs. Jim became withdrawn, his once jovial nature replaced by a quiet, brooding stoicism. He spent his evenings staring blankly at the TV, unable to articulate the consuming grief and helpless rage that consumed him. Sarah, on the other hand, channeled her anguish into tireless activism. She joined support groups for parents of missing children, finding a morbid kinship with others who understood their unique torment. She organized annual vigils for Alex in Capitol Park, the flickering candlelight a fragile symbol of enduring hope, and wrote countless, impassioned letters to politicians, pleading for more resources for cold cases, for a system that wouldn't forget children like Alex. Their other child, Alex's younger sister Emily, was just 12 when her brother disappeared. She grew up in the shadow of his profound absence, her childhood forever marked by the gaping, unfillable hole in their family fabric. Holidays, once joyous celebrations, became excruciating reminders of Alex's missing presence at the dinner table. Alex's birthday, January 15th, was a day of quiet mourning, often spent at the empty park. His bedroom, perfectly preserved, became a shrine, a poignant museum to a life abruptly interrupted. The vibrant colors of his posters faded under the merciless assault of time, the dust settled thick on his textbooks and soccer trophies, yet everything remained untouched, waiting. Waiting for Alex to walk through the door to shed his backpack and resume his life. 12 years crawled by, each one a testament to the Millers' enduring, aching hope. The calendar flipped past the millennium into a new century. Technology had advanced dramatically since 1990. The internet was now commonplace, cell phones were ubiquitous, miniaturized cameras were everywhere. But for the Miller case, nothing changed except the accumulating layers of dust on the file. Detective Olson had eventually retired, his watch taken up by younger, equally dedicated officers who inherited the unsolved mysteries that haunted the department's archives. Alex Miller was a name whispered in Boise, a tragic local legend, a chilling reminder of the unknown dangers lurking beneath the city's seemingly placid surface. The hope that had sustained Sarah and Jim for so long had slowly, agonizingly, calcified into a dull, persistent ache, a constant companion in their daily lives. They had learned to carry it, but it never lightened. It was a brisk Saturday in early November 2002. The hunting season was in full, roaring swing in the vast, rugged wilderness of the Boise National Forest, miles northeast of the city. The air was sharp, carrying the metallic tang of approaching winter and the earthy scent of damp soil. Two brothers, Frank and Eddie Harrison, seasoned outdoorsmen whose families had hunted these lands for generations, were tracking deer deep within a rarely traversed section of the forest, several hours' challenging drive from Boise, past the historical mining town of Placerville, in the steep, often unforgiving terrain near Grimes Creek. They knew this land like the back of their hands, every ridge and gully, but even they were surprised to stumble upon an old, almost completely overgrown, abandoned campsite. It was more a scatter of decaying logs, a few fire-blackened stones, and a rusty, half-buried shovel than a recognizable sight. Curious, and with a hunter's instinct to investigate anomalies, Frank decided to poke around. "Someone left a mess here, Eddie," he grumbled, kicking at a mound of earth near an old, gnarled ponderosa pine whose bark was rough and deeply furrowed. His heavy hunting boot scraped against something unusually hard, something that gave way with a faint, unnatural crunch. Thinking it was just another stubborn rock embedded in the roots, he tried to dislodge it with more force. It wasn't a rock. He knelt, his breath misting in the cold air, brushing away layers of pine needles, damp soil, and tenacious forest detritus. What he uncovered sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the biting wind. It was a dark green canvas backpack, severely deteriorated, the fabric brittle and stained with what looked like years of dirt and moisture. The once sturdy zippers were seized shut with rust and grime, and one strap was almost entirely rotted away, barely clinging to the main body. "Eddie, come look at this," Frank called out, his voice unnaturally hushed, betraying the sudden tremor of unease that had gripped him. Eddie joined him, his eyes widening as he recognized the ominous implications of the find. This wasn't typical hunting camp refuse, carelessly discarded. This looked like it had been deliberately, meticulously buried. With the rusty, almost forgotten shovel they'd found nearby, they carefully, almost reverently began to dig around the backpack, their movements slow and deliberate. The earth was surprisingly loose beneath the surface layer of compacted pine needles and fallen leaves, as if disturbed before. As they widened their excavation, a sickening, unmistakable odor began to emanate from the ground, a scent that spoke of decay and something profoundly wrong. Then a glimpse of something white, something skeletal, partially exposed by their careful digging. Their blood ran cold, a shared, silent horror passing between the brothers. Frank, his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs, pulled out his flip phone, a new gadget he'd only recently acquired, a symbol of the rapidly advancing world outside this ancient forest, and dialed 911, his fingers fumbling slightly. It took nearly an hour for the Ada County Sheriff's deputies to navigate the treacherous, winding forest roads to reach their remote location, followed by detectives from the Boise Police Department who were alerted once the grim nature of the discovery became horrifyingly clear. The scene was quickly secured, a vast area of the dense forest carefully cordoned off with bright yellow tape. Forensic teams, meticulously trained and equipped with tools far more advanced than those of 1990, were mobilized. They began the painstaking process of sifting through the earth, meticulously documenting every detail, every fragment, under portable lights as the daylight began to fade. The backpack was carefully extracted, handled like a sacred, fragile relic. Inside, amidst the decayed, almost unrecognizable remnants of school papers and a few personal items, a rusted pocketknife, a few worn coins, was a crumpled, waterlogged wallet. The contents were severely deteriorated, but a driver's license photo, surprisingly, was still discernible, albeit faded and warped. The face staring out from the laminated plastic was unmistakably young, smiling, full of life. Alex Miller. The news hit Boise like a seismic shockwave, reverberating through the community. The boy who had vanished without a trace in 1990 had been found. 12 years of agonizing uncertainty, punctuated by brief, cruel flickers of false hope, had finally yielded a grim, irrefutable answer. The remains, skeletal and scattered by the relentless passage of time and the opportunistic actions of scavengers, were painstakingly recovered over several arduous days, each bone a tragic testament to a life cut short. Dr. Alina Vance, the state forensic anthropologist, a woman with a reputation for meticulous, almost surgical precision, was brought in. Her expert examination confirmed the initial identification through dental records and, crucially, later solidified through DNA analysis of a small bone fragment, cross-referenced with Jim and Sarah Miller's samples. It was Alex, undeniably, tragically Alex. The discovery brought a strange, bittersweet form of closure to Sarah and Jim. The raw, open wound of not knowing, which had festered for over a decade, had finally, agonizingly begun to scab over, though the deep, indelible scar would remain forever etched on their souls. They had their son back, or at least, what remained of him. The memorial service held at the First Presbyterian Church in Boise was packed to overflowing. People from all walks of life, many of whom hadn't consciously thought about Alex in years, came to pay their respects, shedding tears for the boy lost and the family irrevocably broken by his absence and the brutal passage of time. The case of Alex Miller, once cold as the winter earth, was now blazing hot again. Detective Rebecca Walsh, a sharp, methodical officer with a keen intellect and an unwavering sense of justice, who had inherited Olson's old caseload, took charge. The initial forensic findings, however, presented a new, frustrating layer of mystery. The skeletal remains showed no obvious, definitive signs of trauma that could definitively point to a cause of death. No bullet wounds, no clear stab marks, no blunt force trauma discernible on the aged bones. The advanced state of decomposition, combined with the scatter of the remains, made it excruciatingly difficult to determine the exact circumstances of his death. What was evident, however, was that Alex had been buried shallowly, not far from where his backpack was found, suggesting a hurried, perhaps desperate, attempt at concealment. The area around the burial site was searched intensely, with ground-penetrating radar and metal detectors. Old tire tracks, almost completely eroded by 12 years of weather and forest growth, were noted and photographed. A few rusted remnants of what looked like an old, cheap shovel handle were found, consistent with the one the hunters had initially used to unearth the backpack, perhaps the very tool used for the shallow burial. The renewed investigation revisited everything. Old interviews were meticulously pulled from the archives, digitalized, and cross-referenced. People who had been teenagers in 1990, now adults with their own families and responsibilities, were re-interviewed, their memories hazy with the passage of time, yet sharpened by the sudden, shocking reality of Alex's discovery. Detective Walsh realized the profound difference in investigative resources. In 1990, a few phone calls and door knocks were often the extent of many local investigations, especially once initial leads dried up. In 2002, DNA profiling vastly improved fingerprint technology, though no viable prints were found on the severely weathered backpack, and nascent digital forensics, even if limited for extracting data from 1990, offered tantalizing new avenues. The remote location of the discovery was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Why so far out deep in the National Forest? It strongly suggested intent. Someone wanted Alex hidden, far from the bustling city, far from prying eyes. The sheer remoteness of the site pointed away from a random act of violence by a complete stranger, and more towards someone who either knew the area intimately, or at least had ample time and means to transport Alex there undetected. Who could have done it? Walsh focused intently on the network of friends and acquaintances Alex had in 1990. Mark and Kevin, his last known contacts, were re-interviewed, their initial statements from 12 years prior compared meticulously to their current, often painfully recalled, recollections. They cooperated fully, visibly shaken by the confirmation of their friend's tragic fate. They could offer no new insights beyond their original testimony. Alex had left their house, alone, on his bike. The only detail that subtly shifted, almost imperceptibly, was Kevin's memory of Alex mentioning he might take a shortcut through a lesser-known, unpaved path near the foothills, a path that led towards State Street but was notoriously less traveled at night. This path, Kevin now remembered, would have eventually intersected with rural roads leading out of Boise, deeper into the forest, towards the very wilderness where Alex was found. Could he have been intercepted there? The police explored every lead, however tenuous. A transient man, since deceased, had reported seeing a beat-up blue pickup truck in the foothills area around the time Alex disappeared, but the report had been dismissed in 1990 as unreliable, given the source and lack of corroboration. Now it gained new, chilling significance. Could Alex have hitched a ride? Was it a planned meeting gone tragically wrong? The lack of personal items taken from Alex, save for his wallet, which was still with him, its contents disintegrated, made robbery seem unlikely as a primary motive. His bike was never found, a glaring absence that complicated theories of him being on foot or hitchhiking. If he was killed near the site of his discovery, why was his bike not there? Was it dumped somewhere else entirely, deliberately to mislead investigators, or perhaps kept as a macabre trophy? The narrative remains suspended in this agonizing balance. Alex Miller's remains were found, providing his family with the profound solace of knowing, of finally being able to lay him to rest in the hallowed ground of Dry Creek Cemetery, overlooking the very foothills he once loved. But the why and the who continued to haunt them, and Detective Walsh. The Boise PD officially reclassified Alex Miller's death as a homicide, a tragic, heinous act committed by an unknown assailant. The evidence collected in 2002, while significant in identifying Alex and his location, was still largely circumstantial, a mosaic of fragmented clues that, despite the best efforts of seasoned investigators, refused to form a complete, irrefutable picture. The old shovel remnants, the remote, deliberate burial site, the never-found bike, each piece a silent, unmoving witness, yet unable to speak the full, brutal truth. The weight of the unsolved crime settled heavily once more, a dark cloud over the renewed hope for justice. The foothills of Boise still stood sentinel, their ancient geological formations unchanging witnesses to the passage of time and the quiet dramas below. The Boise River still flowed, an eternal current through the heart of the city. But for Sarah and Jim Miller, the landscape of their lives was permanently and irrevocably altered. They learned to live with the unanswered questions, carrying Alex's memory not as a crushing burden, but as a cherished, beautiful, yet profoundly painful reminder of a bright young life extinguished too soon. The vast, silent woods that had claimed Alex for so long had finally, after 12 arduous years, given him back, but the deepest, darkest secrets they held remained buried, just out of reach, deep within the heart of Idaho, waiting patiently for the day they might finally be unearthed.